Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Bill Murphy, your host of the Red Zone podcast. Today, I interviewed Husen Kapasi. He is the enterprise lead for blockchain for PwC in Europe. And he's really fascinating because it's been a while since we've talked about blockchain on this show. But we're going to talk about how blockchain and innovation works, and in particular within an enterprise. We discussed the top uses for blockchain in the enterprise with track and trace, how to do end-to-end track and trace capabilities. And we also talked about some things that were mistaken assumptions on my part about the importance of tracing documents. So like the document rights management and traceability of documents across all third parties, internal, external. We talked about use cases for this in a business setting and gave really specific concrete examples, both within B2B, B2C, of how he sees blockchain evolving and morphing within its use all the way down to an individual level, all the way to a marketplace, and where we see the disruption happening, and key questions that a CIO can ask about blockchain applicability and use within your business. So I highly encourage you to go find Husen Kapasi. It's Husen Kapasi, Kapasi. Find him on LinkedIn. Go to the show notes page. We're going to have a link to him on LinkedIn. And in the show notes, he's written some really fantastic articles that are published on his LinkedIn profile. Plus, on the show notes, we're going to give you some other avenues to get some really practical B2B background with blockchain and watching these technologies that potentially can be force multipliers for you and your business. So with that, I want to welcome you to my great conversation with Husen Kapasi. Have a great day. Okay, Husen, I want to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. And thanks for reaching out. Very much excited to be here. Yeah.
Well, I was very excited to read your article that was published in the Cointelegraph. And for our listeners, that anybody on LinkedIn, look up Husen Kapasi with PwC, and you can see a wonderful article. And we've had some conversations about blockchain on the show over the past several years, and it's always changing and morphing, and it's gone from concept to actually practical reality. And there's the marketing hype, and then there's the reality of what's happening, and everything in between. So welcome to the program today.
Thanks. Yeah, indeed. I mean, the year, we had a crazy year, I would say, in 2020 because of the COVID. But I mean, if you see the development in this space, this has really boosted the development. And as you mentioned, we see a lot of companies are going from, the POCs or the prototypes towards the implementation. And I mean, if you see the European market, there is a tremendous amount of momentum, not only from the corporates, but also from the European Union level. And it's amazing to see those developments and how things are going ahead, and so fast.
So what would you say if you had to say that? I know in your article there's the top 5 use cases for blockchain. What would you say would be the top 20%? Like I guess that would be the top 1 of the 5. What would you say you're most hearing a use around blockchain right now, where it's just a immediate win for an organization?
So the killer use case, we call it, is a provenance, right? So all
provenance. Okay.
Yes, exactly. That's the killer use case. And it's a big buzzword, right? So how you stitch around a different industry. What is the applicability in a particular industry, in a particular company? How are you going to use it? And I can give you a nice story around it.
Let's talk about provenance. For example. I know you have a story around that, but I'm just to define that. So are you referring to like the source of a product being made and being able to trace and track and see it from source to destination? Is that what you mean by provenance?
So that's a really good question, because it's a big definition, right? And provenance basically we capture as an end-to-end transparency and traceability, right? Okay. And the question comes like, can't you do it without blockchain? Yes, you can. But what blockchain really adds the value is how can you prove what is the source of origin? What is really the source? So the proof of that, and to provide the trust that you can trust on whatever the traceability you are being offered, you can trust on that. That is really the value add. And I think most of the company has that wrong definition, because when you say, okay, provenance is end-to-end traceability, they can say, okay, we can do with a cloud solution. But the myth is, can you integrate in your cloud solution a small transport provider who is bringing and doing your last mile delivery, right? And particularly if you see the US market, I mean, it's a bit Amazonification. I mean, there is a lot of, the fulfillment models and how drop shipping models are developing. I mean, you cannot track that everything. I mean, the company has the visibility, but not a customer has that, right? So, I mean, how can you enable that last part to track that? You cannot provide the cloud access to all those small people or small companies, who are working in your business model. But with the decentralized offering from blockchain, you can even integrate that and be sure that, okay, they can still access that platform, but in a secure manner. So that's really the value add of blockchain in the provenance use case.
So another, I'm going to ask this as a question, but I'm going to say it as a statement. So if a company is sourcing a piece of metal in India and they're using, Harry's transportation service to get it from the plant to out of India, and then it gets picked up by a boat, and then it gets transferred to another boat, and then it makes it over, then it hits a rail car, and then it's Barry's rail car, and then it might get picked up by FedEx or UPS or DHL, and all the way to the end customer. And we could use the same thing even from an Amazon purchase. It leaves the jewelry shop in Montana, and then it ends up being driven by an Uber driver, and then is that what you're referring to as sort of establishing trust across essentially a multitude of third parties?
Yes. So, I mean, that's a very good question. And because I like the question, because you made it very specific, and especially for the listener, it could be interesting. There are a lot of elements, behind that. So one is really, as you explained, what you see in the Amazon is the physical flow, right? That, as you explained, from transport to ship, and then ship to Uber, and then reaches the last mile. But there are a number of documents, in a business process specifically. I mean, if you think about, ordering a product from customer, right? I mean, you don't need that, right? But if you think on the business level, B2B business, right? If for example, any car company is sending, suppliers to any, from one specific country business unit to another business unit, there is a lot of paper flow that is happening. There is a lot of clearance that you need to do. So, for example, a pharma medicine, right? If even if it's the same company, pharma company based in Europe, they want to send the same medicine to India, they need to provide a lot of certificate. That doesn't go with the flow. So what is happening is that your flow, you are able to track it, but you don't know what is the paper flow, because that without that paper, the medicine is not allowed to go out in the country. That is really the bottleneck today, because unless the port doesn't get that paper, they don't allow that container having that medicine to get out of that port towards the inside country. And that is really the bottleneck in the supply chain. So what blockchain does is, because you are not able to attach the PDF in the cloud today, because we have a number of examples of hacking and double invoicing, what we call it, right? There are a number of tamperings happening today, and the company don't trust. That's why they send the paper physically today. And that's a big market. With blockchain, you can have that security, what you need. And you say, okay, this is the transport flow. There you go. You have this 5 paper which you need, that's attached directly to that shipment number. Whoever is responsible is, for example, customs, one of the major stakeholders. Customs can see, okay, this is the shipment, this is the container. I have all the document in one place. They can quickly approve it and then go through it. So typically, that's an industry standard. A container takes 20 days. You can actually expedite it to a couple of days or 3 to 4 days to complete process.
Because it's sitting in port right now, and I guess there's a lot of supply chain problems right now. I mean, they're separate from blockchain, but if things were smoothly operating just from a supply and demand perspective, that boat could potentially sit less amount of time, because the customs could see that this order is a part of a master blockchain, and essentially see their step within it, and it's okay.
And I mean, we have a very famous example of Suez Canal right now, right? Just a couple of months back. I mean, that's a particular example. You had physical objects lying in that ship. There are banking processes, insurance processes, all attached to that. And you know that why it was attached, because insurance were fighting, that who pays that. And that is a very normal day in and day out operations, that there are a lot of Incoterms, what we call it in a supply chain language, right? That is really tightly connected with import and export processes. And you need to pay to certain banks before you pick up the container. You need to have insurance paid out before you deliver it, right? So all those things which is happening behind the curtain, you can completely automatize it using smart contracts. And that's really, the value add, and not really the track and trace, what we call it, because that you can do without also, yeah.
So can you explain what happened then at the Suez Canal? What I'm not as familiar with that story. I'm assuming a ship got stuck because there was a bottleneck in the chain of documents. But maybe you can explain a little bit, give a little more color to that.
Sure. I mean, there was a problem with the ship. It got stuck in the Suez Canal, which is a very strategic, path for ships to transfer from, Europe to Asian countries, right? And because it was so badly placed that no ship can pass it, so it was stuck, for a couple of days. And there was a huge chain of ships, and delay of complete supply chain. And on top of it, it was a COVID time, so there was a huge pressure on the supply chains. And that one ship was then organized in the 5 days, but then still, what happened, the flow of the containers was okay, but the particular ship which was in a problem, that stayed for a few months on that port because bank didn't give a clearance that they can move ahead. Even the insurance, because there was a lot of companies in Japan and US and Europe, they said, okay, who will pay for that demerge? And nobody was come to a conclusion, because that was a few $1 billion what we were talking about. So this kind of avoidance, that you can manage it completely and see, okay, you cannot control the physical challenges, or the human errors, but at least the contractual part. And I think there are a number of elements attached to it, which you can completely automatize it, that you don't need a human intervention in between.
Well, I hope there wasn't a bunch of bananas in the that were backed up.
Yeah,
so it's one thing to have steel. But it's interesting. So basically, my assumption when I talk to you, I have a saying: never underestimate how wrong you can be. My thought on blockchain was that it's a great way to manage, goods at a physical level. But what you're saying is that the documentation around movement of products between multiples of countries and people and
yes.
third party, that the documents and the insurance coverages and the handoffs from person to person, that's actually more complicated than the actual tangible objects. And we've got to find some way, and you call it digital right. The old word was digital rights management, the old Microsoft parlance.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're taking that to another level when you're saying
yes.
contracts, smart contracts, right?
It's a kind of an onion layer mechanism, So we always say it's a 3-layered mechanism what blockchain offers. So the first, as I mentioned, is definitely the track and trace. And what is really the value add is to have, the information also from the small companies. That's the first value proposition, that with the big softwares, you are not able to integrate the small players. And that's why you are missing the complete end-to-end, that's what we call, because you don't know who picked up the fish into the sea. And if you want to really validate the source, you need to also integrate and digitalize those small players. And that's really then the end-to-end traceability. And that's what is the first proposition. The second proposition is around the documentation, right? As we discussed, there are thousands of documents, bill of lading is like identity of a container, right? That's one that needs to flow and that needs to reach before, it reaches to the port, right? The container reaches to the port. So that's, for example, the second documentation is the second proposition. Third proposition is the complete peer-to-peer marketplace. Like how we said, with the internet, we got the e-commerce, right? With blockchain, we get peer-to-peer marketplace. And what we mean, and again, to quote an example with the same port example, right? What we mean is, so for example, nowadays, as you also explained, in that particular example, that if you want to send a particular container, from A to B, let's say to US to Australia, you will book a kind of a freight forwarders who will organize the complete shipment of your container, in a ship and then further on towards Australia, right? But you don't have any control. So what you do, you have a particular system, you book it, you say your freight forwarder that, okay, this is the date and time I need to do it, and then freight forwarder gives you a quotation that, okay, this is what it charges, and it's pretty standard, But in future, what will happen is will have a logistics marketplace. That is really the new business model. And what changes that you don't need a freight forwarder. You have a particular platform. You see all the ships that is going out from a particular port near to your company, and you see, okay, tomorrow there is one ship which has a one container place, and they are offering a discount, and you can directly book it. There is a company coming to your place, picking up that container, and your container is directly going further tomorrow itself. And that's peer-to-peer marketplace is one example. That's a logistics marketplace. I mean, you can talk about finance marketplace, right, for lending and having it. So this enablement of the complete peer-to-peer marketplace is the third value proposition.
It's almost like it's an Uberization of shipping. I mean, I want to get my bananas out like today, and I don't want to wait for the distributor. I should be able to go on the phone and just look at the ship that's coming into 14 miles down the road and just get my bananas on that and ship it. I mean, that's it.
And I mean, again, I like the word you use, Uberization. So I mean, again, the question would be that can't you do without that? Can't you do a marketplace without blockchain?
I guarantee you that Ritz-Carlton, Marriott, the Wyndham, I guarantee you all of the hotels wish they had invented Airbnb. They wish they had invented it. And I think probably what we're watching is going to be the disruption of the supply chain marketplace.
Yes, exactly. And there are solutions out there. So the only argument, we have that why it won't be one party like Uber or having that, championing in that marketplace is because first there are millions of transactions happening which you need to settle out. So with the tokenization feature of blockchain, you can instantaneously settle out. That will ease the life of a lot of companies, who are handling that. And the second is decentralization. Again, if you see particularly, and if you have a narrow focus on one particular, just the shipping industry, right, how they are managing, I mean, there is a lot of monopoly in the market, between a couple of
there's
companies.
Unions, there's the mafia,
and monopoly.
And we can't underestimate the mafia in each one of these cities. I mean, you've got a lot of things that potentially disrupt for sure. But, the taxi cab industry was disrupted, but it didn't go away. It's not like, I mean, I'll call a taxi sometimes before the Uber because I don't want to wait around. I don't want to share a ride with anybody. I just want to get to the destination. And sometimes the taxi is more efficient. But it's funny. Sometimes these industries are disrupted, but they're not necessarily always wiped out.
Yes, correct.
But, I think one of the other things, too, is like if we use the model of the Uberization, it became easy to order a car. And I've got to imagine that someone who's fishing for salmon in the North Sea or off of Norway, they need to make it so easy where they take a picture of the catch and say, this is a certain type of salmon. And then it gets sent to this marketplace where it can get settled, out when the buyers can look at it and such. And I'm just wondering if it's going to be ultimately that easy of what you imagine for blockchain in this application of supply chain.
Yes and no.
Okay.
So, I mean, yes, in a way you described that's going to be easy in a way, but to enable that in a technological manner, that's going to be a challenge, right? So how can you ensure that the photo taken by that particular fisherman is really the original photo which has been taken? And to provide that proof, there is a kind of a technological layer which you need to build. I mean, building that, it's already there today, but to have the mass adoption, that's going to be a challenge, right? So, I mean, today you have crypto anchors, right? What we call it as a kind of, and I think you might have heard and seen also that Samsung Mobile has now a wallet inside it, right? And I think here in Germany, all the OEMs are going to put a kind of a hardware wallet into the car. So I think you can manage it. So you have a particular physical wallet in place which provides you a particular address that, okay, this was really the address which the transaction or the photo or kind of a proof was taken. And that, I mean, it's there for a different industry, as I mentioned in the car, also in the fishing industry. I mean, you use the crypto anchors. I mean, there are multiple applications which is out there, but getting there, I mean, as I mentioned, it's if you compare the trend of internet and blockchain, I mean, it's going really one-to-one. It will take time, but it will be there. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I explain blockchain. Ultimately, we don't care much about the plumbing in our house, only that when we use it, that it works and doesn't break. I envision that blockchain ultimately will just be it's almost like internet protocol. Nobody asks except for people in tech about the layers of the OSI model and layer 7 versus layer 1. I don't know if people are going to really care much about the details, only that someone better figure it out. It better not break.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is a very famous example, or the question which I was raised, because I'm living in Munich with the BMW headquarters. So in one of the conferences, I was asked, like, when you go to buy a car, do you ask normally it's a petrol, diesel, or electric, but you don't go into detail that how the diesel engine works, and you don't get into detail how the petrol engine works. And that's what we are talking about, that understanding whether it's a public or private blockchain and so on, and overall the blockchain, but you really don't get into details, because this is a very complex technology, I would say, which is more or less behind the curtains, right? So, I mean, this is not like AI where you say, okay, this is a data and you make sense out of it, like an IoT where you say, okay, this is a particular device and you have a digital conversion of it. This is really a technology which enables decentralization and enables the trust. And those are intangible things, and as you gave also rightly an example, like an internet protocol, these are all behind the curtain technology. And I think that's why also a lot of CIOs, I would say, and also a lot of companies find it a little bit difficult because it's not that tangible that, okay, what is really the benefit coming out of it? But the real value is, as I mentioned with the particular examples, like, okay, if you go into detail and open that onion layers, like what is really the value add? And I think then you see, okay, there is a tremendous value lying behind that,
Yeah, the one the one element that I always like. There was a story, and I think I might have learned it from that book I mentioned in the beginning. He's been on my podcast a couple of years ago, and Tapscott, and he said, well, in the third world countries, actually, there's a woman I know in the IMF, the world, no, international. It's either the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, but very high level person there. And this is 3 years ago. Their number one or two priority was blockchain, but blockchain because the folks and they primarily, I think, represent the Central America, but in Central America, you don't have a local, I'm sure this is in Germany as well. When you buy a piece of property, it gets registered in the local courthouse, or at least in the old days it did. And I'm sure the equivalent happens here now. It's like that piece of property gets registered and you own it. You're 14, parcel, acre, whatever piece of land. Down there in the Central America, that doesn't happen. So when you buy something, it could be taken away by the mafia or the local person that takes over in charge. So they were thinking that blockchain would be a way for them to register that plot of ground in the larger GPS scale of that town. And it's now proven across multiple endpoints because there's multiple trust vectors, not just a central authority that would say, this is the land, this is my land, I bought it, and there was a trust established there, and now it's a mutable record. And you sort of think, okay, well, how do you extrapolate that out to the business-to-business situation? Because essentially that's a humanity issue, and then we're talking B2B.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, there are multiple examples, right? Especially the biggest example is also in the automotive industry, right? Where now, especially here with the electrification of the industry, right? The battery is coming or sourced mostly from third world countries, right? And there is a huge problem of child labor, also ethical sourcing, right? Whether it's really sourced in an ethical manner. I mean, these are really a lot of challenges they have, and also not only the sourcing part, the recycling part is a challenge even bigger than that, which we will see in the next 10 years.
Okay.
Because I mean, at the moment, if you see and all the facts and figures where the waste is recycled, and I mean normal waste, and now there would be electrical or the chemical hazardous waste, in the couple of years when, there would be recycling of the electric cars. I mean, a lot of companies are really focusing on that, that how we will do that, how can we reuse it. There is a huge challenge on humanitarian, aspects.
On the human what?
On humanitarian aspect, and the other one is on the sustainability topic. I mean, these are the two main topics, which is coming and actually, pressing issues on a lot of, CXOs at the moment that, okay, how are we going to manage that? And how can we ensure that, how can we reuse a lot of topic or a lot of material, which we are already consuming it? So, I mean, these are really, the challenges. And I think this is where, we need to have this kind of new technology bring into picture, where we say, okay, this is how you mix and weld a couple of technologies together and get a solution which is really the best for you to get a particular result for that.
What do you think of the rising complexity? Like, how is PwC positioning the rising complexity and how you make things more simple for not only CIOs to understand, but then once you have something like this in place, that they actually can manage it. I mean, some human has to oversee it, and
yes,
it's scarce labor. So I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I mean that's really our value proposition as a PwC. So I mean, first we are anyway, our cash cow business is auditing, right? So this is where we really audit the stuff, right?
Oh, audit, gotcha,
yeah, audit. And secondly, here when we talk about this kind of emerging technology, right? Because I mean, most of the people when we heard about PwC, they think it's an auditing business, but I think we have different line of services. We have a major management consulting business, along with strategy, and for example, we have tax and legal, so we have different risk assurance businesses. So we have different different line of services over there. How we are tackling this problem first is on the business side, right? How can we make this technology tangible? So, I mean, blockchain is not only the technology that will solve all the business problems or real life problems. I mean, we need to mix and match different technologies. We need to understand what is really the landscape, how companies are running, and make it really tangible that either company can make money out of it, and have a proper business case. So, I mean, we are really making and trying to address what business problem are we solving, and not really going from the blockchain side. Like, okay, we want to use blockchain, that's why we are using. We really try to avoid, because I mean, most of the time when we enter a company, that's normally the game that, okay, we are probably missing out the game over here. We want to really be in the game, and we want to do something in this space. And then we say, okay, what are really the business problem you want to try to solve? Not only your focus in business problem, but an industry-wide business problem. And that leads to our second point. We play our role as an ecosystem driver, what we call, because if you talk about BMWs and Daimlers of the world, they have hundreds of suppliers, but they don't have the capacity, if we talk about end-to-end visibility, they don't have the capacity basically to coordinate with their suppliers to have that visibility. So they need a particular ecosystem driver who connects and say, okay, this is the concept, but we need to have all the companies on board to drive that and to make it reality, and this is one of the major roles we drive in this kind of ecosystem.
So you're envisioning one way is creating the marketplace for that vertical market, and then opening it up to opening the APIs up to the suppliers, so suppliers feed into that and that overall framework of automation.
So, I mean, we don't focus on the technological part. I mean, indeed, we have a lot of capabilities in-house. We have the technological consulting and so on, but that's not the core. We are purely going as a consulting business, right? And we are enabling the complete ecosystem. Having said
just
that,
within the industry itself, though,
exactly.
where do you see the industry? Like, where do you see it shifting to? Is it more of the marketplaces are going to be built to solve particular needs, and then they're going to open it up to third parties and phone vendors and such, so they can feed into it?
Yes, I mean, definitely. So, I mean, if you really take any topic around this, blockchain is definitely ecosystem play. Blockchain, we have our own frameworks, and we say, okay, blockchain, if you want to really develop a solution, minimum you need 4 to 5 companies. If it's really a handful of companies, you can definitely do without blockchain, because you can have a particular software, install it, and have a sharing of information. When you use blockchain is when things get out of your hand, that you don't have a control particular, even it's your product, but you don't have a control on that. And that's where blockchain gets particularly interesting. Having said that, blockchain automatically becomes an ecosystem play. So be it any use case or be any business problem, you try to tackle it, it automatically gets into an ecosystem.
Okay. And so one of the big things with blockchain is that the trust is established between the nodes itself, and you're leveled up across thousands of nodes, not a central player. So what's a common question that comes up related to governance and trust within? By definition, blockchain, when you use it from a cryptocurrency perspective, that's what drives people crazy, because you have the good that comes with that, with the anonymization, but then you also have the bad, which is money laundering and ransomware payments child trafficking and all this stuff that's awful. So you have sort of the Wild West of underpinnings of blockchain. And then you have like people building up these applications on top of blockchain. But I guess in some respects, the internet would be useless. Like IP is useless unless you have an application built on top of it. And
Yes.
so I mean, blockchain technically is not really useful unless you have an app on top of it.
Yes,
I'm just curious where you see that going.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, blockchain is not a single-handed play. So I mean, it definitely needs to work with internet and way other technologies like ERP systems. So if you think, I would like to answer this in two layers, because I mean there are a lot of myths, attached to that questions.
Sure.
But I mean, let me first clear it out how we are going to interact. So how we are going to interact is going to be a mobile application or a web-based application, right? That's how you're going to interact with blockchain. Having said that, you need to really develop a complete technological stack, that this is your mobile application, and then, you have a particular database or a cloud layer, right? And then you have the blockchain layer, and that you need to exactly define. And that's what we also do normally in our business. So you need to really define, is it IoT, AI, cloud, user experience or mobile applications. This is all you need to stitch together along with the blockchain layer, and that's how you're going to use it, ultimately. So the myth around it, as you also highlighted, there is a lot of myth. Is it energy consuming? There is a lot of myth around being anti-money laundering happening with the tokens and so on. But ultimately, when you go really into deep dive sessions with the company, they have the same concerns. But how are we going to address it? I mean, there is two different worlds. That's what I mentioned before. We also categorize our business line according to that. One is all around crypto, and one is all around enterprise. There is a real application of blockchain in that. Having said that, how are we going to use it? Is you have a private blockchain possibility, that you completely developed on a Hyperledger Fabric, for example, or Sawtooth Fabric, where you completely develop your application. But there is also a lot of debate, like, okay, is really private blockchain, decentralized and so on. I mean, of course, I mean, it's about, comparison like an intranet and internet. And if you see, you still use intranet, yeah. So you still use intranet in the companies. I mean, we all have the intranet, but it's a seamless integration with the internet. So you don't have a kind of layer, and it's going to be like that. So I mean, there would be ecosystem which will be developed in a private blockchain. And then there is a very interesting example I can give. So I mean, for example, you develop a particular, let's speak about the same port example, right? So you want to take a container. So you develop with shipping company and few other companies, a particular application that you want to have all the documents, all the traceability in that, and you develop it on a private blockchain. But now it comes to, as we discussed, that you need to have a bank clarification, you need to have insurance clarification. I mean, it's not only one bank and one insurance you're talking about. There would be a series of bank and series of insurance. And if you see the trade, that's what we park it in a topic called trade finance. That's a combination of supply chain and finance industry. If you see that particular industry, it's all ecosystem play. There are so many ecosystems, like, we have WeTrade, and I mean, so many examples. There are 35 banks, 50 banks, 100 banks coming together and particularly addressing one clearing topic. At that point of time, that are based on public blockchain, for example. So then you have a problem that you have a private blockchain and you have a public blockchain which needs to work together. That means in future, it will work like intranet and internet.
Sure.
And there would, if you hear a lot of communication or conference from the expert, I mean, they always debate around who will win, public or private, and how, they always debate about that private blockchain is not a decentralized. I mean, we are not able to change that in reality. I mean, that's how the industry will develop. Different industry will adopt to different platforms, and they will develop a very unique solutions. And the only thing is that we find a solution that how all things work together. So, I mean, that's going to be the reality.
Yeah, but you fundamentally see that the example of that ship sitting in the port, and it's got to communicate internally with the people that have put the bill of ladings and all of the the stuff that's loaded on that ship. But then externally, you've got bank partners and insurance companies and all of that that has to be reconciled. But what you're saying is those are the contracts that have to be reconciled, and you're going to have an internal ones and external ones, just like intranet
exactly
modern day. Exactly. And that's constantly, when you think about it, since the 90s, it's been what we've been doing for 30 years is taking some of the old mainframe technologies and figuring out a way to convert them into public sphere while keeping certain data private and public. that constant challenge of as the technologies change, what stays private, what stays public, what do we
Yes.
share, what do we not share, how do we secure it? So it's quite interesting that analogy you just made.
Yes, indeed.
Do you think that what do you think is going to potentially could stop blockchain in its tracks? Are there any forces out there that could disrupt the adoption of blockchain because of its power?
I mean, indeed, I mean, government has all the power, right? So I mean, having said that, but I think from a business perspective, I would say, one of the major challenges would be the awareness of it, at the moment, like how much people understand about this technology, because the landscape is growing at a speed, if you compare with other technology, what is being developed in 1 year, in the blockchain space that is being developed in 1 month. That's a tremendous space, what we have in this space. And I think to be updated on this space or in the blockchain space is a massive challenge, because I mean, it's one concept now being diverted in different industries, different applications, different functions of the company, and it's massive. And how these solutions are being developed. So I mean, that is the one risk I see, because I mean, everybody has a different understanding, of what blockchain is. There is a lot of myth behind it. So I mean, that is one of the major roadblocks we see, that we need to have a common understanding. And that's why I see that a lot of interviews and the podcast what we have that brings the light towards this topic is really helpful, because I mean, there is a lot of myths because of this, because people come from different background, they have a particular understanding of the technology, and they have their own perspective that how things work. But sometimes it could be possible that that's not the right perspective, I mean, that things can work differently. So I mean, how we have a common understanding and of this complex topic is one of the biggest challenge. And I think second most, as I mentioned already, it could be regulatory. I mean, there are pros and cons. So I mean, for example, in energy, I will again quote an example. I mean, energy is a very good example, I would say, to quote over here, that peer-to-peer energy trading is one of the most beautiful use cases of blockchain. But in reality, you need to remove all the authorities and regulators in between to do that. And I mean, that's not going to happen. I mean, if you see, companies like Google and a lot of companies have already explored those use cases, but you haven't seen in the last 5 years, because I mean, there are big boss sitting in between where you cannot do anything,
Yeah,
so,
I also think potentially another great area is healthcare, and I'm sure
yes.
that's already underway. But I'm wondering if it's possible to build blockchain around the individual, because technically, when I go into a doctor's office, I should be registered in a blockchain, and my health records, I should be able to give certain health records to radiology, certain to my general practitioner, certain to my health doctor, one to my physical therapist. It goes on and on and on. Like, I don't need to give my whole record to everybody. I just need to give certain parts of it and have it secure, and not have people like violate those parts that I have basically given them rights to. So I'm curious if you see that being a potential use case.
That's very good point, because till now we always spoke about B2B, and now we are talking about B2C, that taking blockchain to a consumer level, right? And what you had just explained became a reality last week.
Last week?
So yes, already a reality last week here in Germany. So there has been, and it has been approved by the regulatory, and it's around, developing a blockchain solution, as you mentioned, that how can you, and especially this is around cancer research, so, and they are very specific. It's around pancreatic cancer. So at the moment, they have a big challenge to collect data of pancreatic cancer, because there are GDPR rules that you cannot use all the patient data and so on. So now they have a mobile application, where exactly as you explained, that you can actually decide what amount of information you want to share with which particular party or a hospital or a particular research institute for how long, so particular amount of time, and you are actually rewarded with the particular tokens of that. So that application got a huge response in European market, and it's a huge success. And this is already last week live. So I mean, wow. I was super excited, to see that news. And I mean, that's not only the technology. I mean, they have done a tremendous job. It's not only the data what they collect; they're using the database what they're collecting anonymously on top of some AI algorithms, which then already provides, the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 cancer. So, I mean, It's not that you can predict it stage 3, but that's how they're using that you can avoid getting at a later stage. So, I mean, they're combining blockchain and AI application together. And I mean, I personally feel that's a huge, leapfrog jump, I would say, in the humankind. So, I mean, because we are completely revolutionizing, a lot of research methodologies over there.
Yeah, that's the United States is so far behind. They think they're in front with identity management. I mean, it's pretty bad compared to the European Union. But I since the mid 90s, mid 2000s, the identity management seminars that I would go to have talked about this ultimate goal of having the human being be able to have a token that Amazon gets a certain amount of information about me, but they don't need my health records. And if I go to buy a house, the broker needs certain financial records, but they need different type of financial records than Amazon needs to execute a transaction.
Yes.
And then if I go to the health, and then as I interoperate with the world, not everybody needs everything. When I go to buy an insurance policy, and I interact, and they need to know my health records, they don't need everything, but they need to know enough to underwrite the policy. And so that, I think, at a human scale is what's completely necessary in this complex world. And I believe that's a reason why blockchain and AI are here, is to help with that, because it's beyond the complexity that human beings can manage. What do you think?
Yeah, completely. And I mean, I'm not sure if it's already in the news, but I heard from my network already that the German government are going to issue a particular identity wallet. So in that wallet, you will have your passport, all the identities, your medical records, your transport, travel passes, everything. So wherever you go, what they want to achieve is, be it a hotel or an airport or a medical institute or any particular entity where you need to provide your financial proof, you can have control from one application. And what kind of information you can share to whom, you have a control. I mean, it also applies to the job application, because with the job application, if you can see you are providing a complete history of yours to a particular company, with a CV and all the details, all your documentation, right? But you don't know whether how it is being maintained, whether it is being deleted, according to the company policy after a couple of months. But here, what you can do is, for example, you provide a particular application and you can revert it back after a couple of weeks. Once you're approved by the job, or you're rejected, you can completely retry all your information with one click. So, these applications are, being developed in all these different aspects. And I think this is really going to be the future. So I'm pretty optimistic about it. Yeah.
I mean, the United States was founded in the sovereignty of the individual versus the sovereignty of the king. And there's really interesting. I live in the town that George Washington, Annapolis, Maryland. George Washington, after he won the war against England, he literally walked. The Continental Congress was meeting in Annapolis. He literally handed the keys of all of the major players in the Continental Congress of the United States were there, and they were all holding their breath, because they were like, in the past, the winner of the war just took over the country and they ran the country. And he said, no, I'm going back down to my farm. And he handed back the keys to the army, back to people. And it was a real big stake in the ground. And I think right now in the United States, there's no right to be forgotten. And there's no right of the sovereign individual anymore digitally. And maybe we can make an argument politically as well, but definitely digitally. And I think the movement, it's ironic that the movement to be forgotten is originating in the European Union but I think that's actually, from a history perspective, we're a young country, but that's the only savior I think we have, is potentially you're giving up, in one respect, you might have to give up some freedom for have a digital token. But on the other hand, it's the only way to manage being forgotten by all these entities that are taking your data and profiting on the back end that you never gave them permission to use in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, what about Estonia? Isn't Estonia the first that had the digital wallets, and Germany, I guess, is jumping on and mimicking them, or are they doing something different?
I would say Estonia is way ahead.
Okay.
because we are tightly connected because PwC also is there. So I think we had we call it under the public sector because I mean all the public services what they provide, they have a very controlled digital platform for that. And I think if you see the traceability, I mean they are doing already for a couple of years now.
Wow.
And I mean there are so many services there, and also how they're registering the company, right? So I mean if you have heard it, it's the easiest way to get a citizenship over there, and also registering a company over there. And I can sit in India and I can register a company in Estonia and do a business over there. That's the level of digitalization what we are talking with Estonia. So
wow, it's just they're so far in front right now.
Yeah, and I mean they are able to manage because of the scale. I mean it's a small country, and they call it, that's why we are having that leapfrog, jump in the services with the offer. I mean they're really benefiting in a lot of fronts. Yeah.
Wow. Well, as we wrap up, Husen, we've covered a lot of ground here today. What do you want to make sure my audience is aware of? What are your parting thoughts as we wrap up today?
That's a great question. So, I mean, I would say, definitely get into the details of blockchain. That would be my first recommendation, because I mean, bringing awareness into the market starts with the self-awareness, what exactly it is, how we are going to use it. That's the first and the foremost thing. The second thing is really thinking not siloed, like, okay, we need to do something on a blockchain, but really big picture, that how are we going to change, or how are we going to digitalize a particular business or the services we consume as a consumer, and if you think in that level, you will see, okay, blockchain is just one piece of technology, but there are a lot of elements attached to it, or we need to weld it, and that really helps you to have a complete new perspective. So that's the second perspective or second takeaway I would like to give. And the second thing is really, staying updated in this market. I mean, again, this is more or less getting the awareness and updation. And because this space, if you think, okay, I mean, I'm there here since 3.5 years, but I'm still I'm lagging behind, because this space is moving so fast. It's really hard to pace up. So I think you need to really focus on one particular area, what we need to see, and then what are the possibilities over there. So this is really, and also navigate through the regulatory challenges, I would say. So it's not like it's not really possible. So for example, there are a number of industries in the forest industries here that regulators are already getting on board on the blockchain platform. So it's not correct to think that, okay, this will never be accepted by regulators or the customs or any other regulatory body. We need to see how we can manage this and how we can involve in the decision makings going further. And I think this will be really a big leapfrog in making blockchain success in the next 5 to 10 years. Yeah.
Well, if it tracks like a lot of the exponential technologies track with the government, it's going to track faster than the government can respond. And the government is not going to be happy with the fiefdom of power essentially being decentralized, because it's the antithesis of top-down control. It is going to be interesting to see everybody's response there. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show, Husen. This is really a wonderful treat to be able to have this conversation with you, and I appreciate you for your time today.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you so much for having me today.
All right. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.